The hum of crystal glasses and whispered deals filled Il Silenzio, the restaurant where silence wasn't just a name, it was an unspoken law. Every corner gleamed with power, mahogany walls, gold chandeliers, men whose smiles hid knives. To outsiders, it was an exclusive paradise. To those who knew better, it was Lealdo Onio's kingdom, and tonight, the king was losing patience. Lealdo sat at the head of the table, his black tuxedo cutting sharp lines against the dim glow. 60 years old, with silver hair slicked like polished steel, he carried the stillness of a man who had survived too many wars to count. His presence alone commanded quiet, the kind born of fear, not respect. Across from him sat his associates, men who ruled empires built on favors and blood. But Lealdo's mind wasn't on the conversation. It was on time, on the fact that someone, somewhere in this establishment, dared to keep him waiting. A flick of his cufflinks. A tightening jaw. He didn't like waiting. Not for anyone. Then, through the reflection in his untouched wine, he saw her, hurrying through the corridor, a tray trembling in her hands. The waitress. 5 minutes late. His gaze followed her as she navigated the maze of tables. Young, early 20s perhaps. Uniform neat but worn. Her dark hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. The look of someone who had already lost the day before it began. She placed a trembling hand on the tray as she approached, murmuring an apology. Lealdo's hand rose slowly, and with one pointed finger, he stopped her words mid-breath. "You're late," he said, not loud, but heavy enough to crush the room into silence. The guests froze. Even the air held its breath. Lindsey Specter felt her stomach collapse in on itself. She had sprinted the last 6 blocks after her bus broke down, changed in the alley behind the kitchen, and still failed. Now the man she served, the man her manager called Il Leone, was staring at her like a problem that needed eliminating. I'm sorry, sir. The traffic, his stare sliced through her excuse. You think I care about traffic? The words hit harder than they should have. Her fingers tightened around the tray to keep it from shaking. She could feel every eye at the table watching her crumble. And then a flicker. The dim chandelier light caught something at her throat. Lealdo's breath hitched. For a moment, the entire table vanished from his awareness. The noise, the stares, the unspoken hierarchy gone. All that existed was the faint glint of silver. A pendant. Small, circular. Familiar. He had seen it last in the palm of his daughter Alessia's hand the night before she disappeared 10 years ago. He had buried that memory with her name. Now it was around this waitress's neck. The fury drained from his face, replaced by a silence that felt heavier than any threat. His men exchanged wary glances. They knew that look. It wasn't anger. It was recognition. Lindsey noticed his expression change. Confusion flickered through her chest. Why was he staring like that? Lealdo leaned forward, his voice suddenly low, unsteady. "Where did you get that necklace?" The question didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like a ghost had spoken. And that's when Lindsey realized this wasn't about being late anymore. The silence that followed Lealdo's question stretched longer than it should have. Lindsey's fingers instinctively curled around the pendant at her throat, unsure whether to protect it or hide it. She'd been yelled at before, insulted, threatened, even fired, but never like this, not with a voice that cracked beneath its own weight. The man who had scalded her with fury only moments ago now looked like someone unraveling, as if the necklace had ripped open something inside him. Behind him, the long table of black suits and watching eyes blurred into the background. "Come with me," Lealdo said, rising slowly, not a command so much as a reckoning. His voice had lost its volume, but not its power. Everyone at the table obeyed the silence he left behind. Lindsey hesitated, glancing at the maitre d', who gave her a single tight nod as if surrendering her fate to a higher authority. Lealdo's men, 2 of them, tall and coiled like springs, flanked her as they moved down a hall marked staff only. The walls, once alive with kitchen clatter and whispered service calls, now echoed like a tomb. He led her into a private lounge near the back, empty except for a deep leather sofa, a desk, and a liquor cabinet untouched in months. One of his men shut the door behind them while the other took position just outside, arms folded. Lindsey stood awkwardly near the chair, unsure whether to sit or run, her heart pounding loud enough to hear. Lealdo didn't sit either. He turned his back to her, staring at a framed photo on the wall, a black and white portrait of an old Italian village, a place that looked like it hadn't changed in a century. He spoke without turning. "You're going to tell me where you got that necklace. And you're going to tell me now." The softness was gone. His voice had returned to its edge, but the tremor underneath betrayed the storm within. Lindsey swallowed, her throat dry, her fingers brushing the necklace again, unsure how much truth this man was ready to hear. It was a gift. Lealdo turned. From who? His stare locked on hers like a predator scenting something familiar. Lindsey flinched slightly, but didn't step back. "I was 15, she said, her voice low. "I was living in a shelter. She was there too. Her name was Anna." The name caught in Lealdo's chest like a jagged piece of glass. "Describe her," he said, the words brittle, urgent. Lindsey looked down, trying to pull the memory from beneath years of survival and dust. "She was sick," she said. "Thin. Always looked over her shoulder. Brown hair a little past her shoulders. She had this sadness, like she was afraid of being seen and terrified of being forgotten at the same time." Lealdo's jaw clenched. He said nothing for several long seconds, then gestured toward the couch. "Sit." Lindsey obeyed, perching on the edge. He poured himself a drink from the cabinet but didn't touch it. Instead, he stood at the window, the glass reflecting his haunted expression. "Go on." Lindsey drew in a breath. "I had just arrived at the shelter. My mom, she was gone. Drugs, bad choices. I bounced between places until one of the caseworkers brought me there. It was only supposed to be for a few days." She paused. "But that's where I met Anna." The memory unfurled slowly, not like a movie, but like an old diary being reopened for the first time. Lindsey saw it again, the worn mattress, the sterile lighting, the quiet sobs muffled behind thin walls. Anna had barely spoken at first. She had huddled in the corner of her bunk, flinching at every sound, clutching a ratty duffel bag like it held the last pieces of her life. "She didn't tell anyone much," Lindsey said softly. "But she talked to me. Not a lot, just enough. We'd play cards on the floor or sit outside during smoke breaks even though neither of us smoked. She once said she used to be someone else, someone with a different name. But she had to leave that behind." Lealdo finally turned to face her, the glass untouched in his hand. "Why'd she give you the necklace?" Lindsey looked at the chain again, its soft glint catching the room's yellowed light. "One night, she woke me up. Said she was leaving. Said she'd stayed too long and they might be looking for her. I asked who, but she just said, 'People with polished shoes and polished lies.'" Her lips twitched at the phrase, a teenage girl's attempt at poetry. "Then she gave me this," Lindsey added, tapping the pendant, "and told me to keep it safe. She said it used to belong to someone she loved more than herself, and that she couldn't carry it anymore." Lealdo closed his eyes. Alessia's words. His daughter's words. He'd heard her say something almost identical when she was 16, standing on the steps of their old summer home, angry at him, heartbroken about a life she hadn't chosen. Sometimes, she had told him, the things we love become weights if we wear them too long. "Anna," he whispered aloud now. It was her. Lindsey looked up. "You knew her?" Lealdo gave a sharp nod. "She wasn't Anna. Her name was Alessia. Alessia Onio. My daughter." Silence choked the room. Lindsey's mouth parted slightly, stunned. I didn't know," she said. "I never asked. I thought she was just lost." "She was," Lealdo muttered. "And I let her go." He turned toward his bodyguard in the doorway. "Find every women's shelter in the city. 10 years back. I want every intake log, alias list, staff interview. If she was there, I want it confirmed. And I want it now." The man nodded and vanished down the hallway without a word. Lindsey remained seated, her hands in her lap, her whole world tilting on its axis. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," she said quietly. Lealdo shook his head. "You didn't. You may have just reopened the only door that matters." The old Don moved to the other side of the room, staring at nothing, consumed by the image of his daughter's face, not the one from the news, the fake obituary, the photoshopped accident story, but the real girl, fierce and frightened, who once dared to defy him. And disappeared. She left because of me, he said. Because I tried to force her into something she didn't want. A marriage. An alliance with the Martellis. Lindsey raised her eyes. The mob family? Lealdo gave a tight nod. I wanted peace. I thought binding bloodlines would stop the wars. But she saw him for what he was: cruel, arrogant. And I ignored her. She ran. She vanished. His voice cracked. Left behind everything. Even me. They sat in silence for a long time. Then Lindsey asked, "Do you think she's still alive?" Lealdo didn't answer right away. Then he said, "I stopped hoping years ago." But now, he looked at the necklace again, this time not with anger, but with reverence. "Now I'm not so sure." Outside the door, the soft murmur of his men relaying information started to filter in. A name here. A location there. Clues resurfacing from a city that had forgotten them. Lealdo stood tall again, years of grief held stiff in his spine. "We'll find out," he said. "If she gave you that necklace, you were the last person she trusted. That means you matter now. That means your family." Lindsey wasn't sure what shook her more, the idea of being connected to the most feared man in New York, or the fact that, after years of drifting, someone had finally called her family. Outside the window, the lights of the city burned on, blind to the secret that had just been resurrected in the shadows of a name long thought dead. The smoke from Lealdo's cigar curled upward in lazy spirals, vanishing into the dim light of the study. The walls were lined with polished wood and thicker secrets, each book on the shelf more for hiding than reading. Across from him, seated in a high-backed leather chair, was Cesare Vittori, consigliere, old friend, and the only man still alive who knew everything. Cesari's expression hadn't changed in 20 years, but tonight, his eyes showed a flicker of something rare: sorrow. Lealdo poured them both a drink, his hands steady even as his soul trembled. "She was supposed to come back," Lealdo said quietly. "No matter how far she ran." He stared into the amber swirl of his glass, as if the truth were buried in the bottom. Cesare didn't speak, not yet. He waited, as he always had, for the weight to land where it must. Lealdo took a long sip and then leaned back. "It started with the Martelli deal. You remember." Cesare gave a single nod. "I told her it was politics, not love. That the marriage would be symbolic, a union of power, nothing more." Lealdo paused. "But she wasn't like me. She believed in freedom. In choosing your own fate." "She was fire," Cesare said softly. "That kind of fire doesn't take to chains." Lealdo's jaw tightened. The Martelli boy, Luca, he was volatile. A snake in designer shoes. I knew that. Everyone did. But we needed the peace. After the Chinatown raid, after the port smuggling charges, we were bleeding on every front. "She said no," Cesare said, stating the obvious. "She screamed no," Lealdo corrected. "She called me a coward. Said I was selling her off like meat. She didn't understand what I was trying to do." "She understood," Cesare said, meeting his gaze. "She just didn't forgive you for it." Lealdo looked down, nodding once. 3 days before the wedding, she vanished. No warning. Just a note on her pillow. He retrieved it from a drawer, yellowed now with time, creased at the edges. He handed it to Cesare without looking. Cesare unfolded it slowly. "I'm not a pawn. I won't be traded for peace. If you love me, don't look for me." "She underestimated how much I did love her," Lealdo said. "Because I never stopped." The memories rose like ghosts. Alessia, 17, furious with the world. Alessia, 15, sneaking out to read poetry under the garden lights. Alessia, 6 years old, riding her first bike down the villa path while he watched, pretending not to smile. "She was the only thing I ever got right," he whispered. Cesare placed the letter back on the table. "You lied about her death." "I had no choice," Lealdo said. "Word got out she was gone. The Martellis demanded answers. If they knew she had run, the blood war would have reignited. So I faked the accident. Car off a bridge in Montauk. Closed casket. We buried an empty box. The Martellis accepted it? They didn't care about her. They just wanted the optics. Their boy got pity. I got peace. And she got her freedom at a cost. You ever come close to finding her? Cesare asked. Lealdo's face darkened. Once. A girl matching her description popped up in Jersey 2 years later, working in a bookstore under the name Anna G. But by the time my men got there, she was gone again. Like smoke. And the necklace? Cesare gestured. One of a kind, Lealdo said. Commissioned by a metalsmith in Palermo. Alessia designed it herself when she turned 16. Said she wanted something that didn't look rich, just real. She gave it to the girl, Lindsey, Cesare murmured. Which means she was still running, but maybe not alone. Lealdo looked toward the window. She had a reason to pass it on. That girl's not just a witness. She's a chapter. Lindsey stepped out of Il Silenzio into the thick night air, the city blurring around her like a smeared painting. Her head throbbed with everything she'd just heard. Alessia. Anna. The woman who gave her the necklace, not a stranger, but a daughter of a man with blood under his fingernails and grief in his eyes. A fugitive, a legend, and possibly her only link to something resembling family. She didn't know what to feel. The cab ride back to her apartment felt surreal. The lights outside passed like ghosts. Her phone buzzed with a missed call from her grandmother, who probably assumed she was working late again. Lindsey stared at her reflection in the taxi window and saw someone she didn't recognize, not just tired or confused, but on the verge of something much bigger than she'd ever imagined. When she reached her building, she sensed it before she saw it, a man across the street, standing just outside the glow of the street lamp. Not smoking, not moving, just watching. When she turned to face him, he slipped away into the dark. Lealdo watched the monitor feed from a sleek black SUV parked 2 blocks down. Cesare sat beside him, tablet in hand. You had her followed, he said, not surprised. She's part of this now, Lealdo replied. I don't trust coincidence. Cesare raised an eyebrow. You think she's lying? No, Lealdo said slowly. I think she's telling the truth. But she doesn't know everything. And I want to know what she doesn't. I'll double up the tale, Cesare offered. Quietly. No mistakes. Lealdo's voice dropped. If there's even a chance Alessia is alive, I want to find her. Before anyone else does. Cesare nodded. And if she's not? Lealdo's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Then I want to know why this girl has her necklace. The next morning, Lindsey sat at the edge of her bed, the necklace laid flat in her palm. She traced the edges, trying to remember Anna's voice, the way she'd whispered goodbye, the warmth in her hands despite the cold in her eyes. She never said her real name, never mentioned family, just said, this belonged to someone I loved more than myself. Now, that someone had a name. Alessia. And that name had a weight. She opened her laptop and typed it in Alessia Onio. No results. The name had been scrubbed clean from the internet. No obituaries, no wedding announcements, no gossip blogs. Just a few blurry photos in old tabloids under coded headlines. Heiress vanishes days before marriage. Tragedy in the Onio Empire. The details were shallow, but the implication was clear. This woman had vanished for a reason. And someone, maybe everyone, had helped make her disappear. Lealdo returned to his villa later that night and stood before the locked door of Alessia's old room. No one had been inside in nearly a decade. The dust on the handle was unbroken. Slowly, reverently, he turned the key. It was exactly as she left it. Books still stacked on the windowsill. A Polaroid of her and her dog, now long dead, pinned to the mirror. Her perfume bottle, half full. A pair of ballet slippers, never worn, hung on the back of the door like a forgotten dream. He stepped inside, breathing in the past. In the corner, a jewelry box sat unopened. He knelt beside it and opened the lid. Empty. The necklace had truly gone with her. Back in the city, Cesare met with a contact from a private network of social workers. He slid a photo of Alessia, digitally aged 10 years, across the table. She might have used the name Anna Gable, he said. 2013, shelter records. Low profile. Sick. Possibly a child. The woman frowned. That alias matches a transient file from a youth shelter in Brooklyn. She stayed 3 nights. No ID. Left before intake was complete. Cesare leaned forward. Did she leave anything behind? A name. Scrawled on a napkin. The woman pulled it from her file. Lindsey Specter. Kind eyes. That was it. Cesare stared. She remembered the girl. What do you think Alessia was really running from, her father's world, or something even darker beneath it? Let us know your theory in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss Chapter 4 of this unfolding mystery. Lindsey awoke to the knock of someone who didn't believe in being ignored. 3 raps, evenly spaced, followed by a pause like a warning. She sat up on her worn-out couch, clutching the blanket tighter around her as the morning light filtered through her half-closed blinds. Her eyes drifted to the clock, 7:48 a.m. too early for packages, too firm for neighbors, and too sharp to be anything good. When she opened the door, she found exactly what she expected and nothing she could have prepared for. The man standing there wore a charcoal coat, dark slacks, and the kind of posture that told you he never leaned unless it was over a table full of secrets. He wasn't tall, but his presence made the narrow hallway shrink. His face was stern, precise, framed by salt and pepper stubble, his eyes dark and unblinking. "Miss Specter," he said. "I'm Cesare Vittori. Mr. Onio sent me." Lindsey's fingers clenched the edge of the door. Right. The Don's personal shadow. Cesare's lips twitched, not a smile, more like a flicker of tolerance. "May I come in?" She hesitated before stepping back, motioning silently toward the couch. He didn't sit, just scanned the room once, as if taking inventory of everything that mattered and most of what didn't. The apartment wasn't much, a 1-bedroom walk-up with peeling paint and a heater that coughed more than it warmed. Lindsey's grandmother's cross hung above the kitchen doorway, and a threadbare couch served as both guest bed and emotional support system. Cesare walked slowly, his shoes making no sound against the hardwood, until he stopped in front of the small table beside the TV. There, resting in a porcelain dish, was the necklace. "You took it off," he said, more observation than question. Lindsey shrugged, arms folded. "Didn't feel right sleeping with it after last night. Not after what I know now." Cesare nodded once, then turned to face her fully. "We're going to talk about that night. The shelter. The woman you called Anna." Lindsey sat across from him, legs tucked beneath her like a child in trouble. She'd half expected to be threatened, or bribed, maybe, but there was something colder about Cesare's approach. He wasn't interested in intimidation. He was interested in truth. And he came armed with patience sharp enough to cut through lies. "She came in late," Lindsey began, voice quiet but steady. "Didn't speak much the first day. Wore this oversized coat like she was hiding in it. Always clutching a small duffel. When she looked around, it was like she saw enemies in every corner." Cesare listened without blinking, his attention so precise it felt like interrogation by silence. "How long was she there?" he asked. 3 nights, Lindsey answered. 4th morning, she was gone. No one saw her leave. No goodbye. She glanced at the necklace. "Except me. She left that with me, pressed it into my palm, and said I looked kind." "Did she mention family?" Cesare asked, his voice still even. Lindsey shook her head. "No names. No details. But she was scared. Not just running from someone. It felt bigger, like she was trying to erase herself." Cesare slowly pulled a small envelope from inside his coat and set it on the table. Inside was a printout, shelter logs, intake sheets, and a brief incident report. The name she used was Anna Gable, he said. Listed no ID. No emergency contact. But one of the staff remembered her. Described her exactly the way you just did. Lindsey exhaled slowly. "So it's real. It wasn't just some sad story I held on to." Cesare leaned forward. "Everything you said matches. Including the timeline. She entered the shelter in 2013. Left 3 days later. Vanished again." He tapped the edge of the paper. "But here's the part you didn't know. Next to her bunk, they found a napkin. Folded. On it, written in blue ink, 2 words, Lindsey Specter." The air left Lindsey's lungs. "She remembered me?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "She was planning to leave," Cesare said. But she wanted you remembered. That means something. Lindsey looked down at the necklace again, the weight of it now impossibly heavier. She left me with this. And all these years. I thought it was just a nice goodbye. I didn't realize I was the last person who ever saw her. Cesare nodded solemnly. You were. They sat in stillness for a while, the hum of the city creeping through the cracked window, sirens and footsteps painting the background. Then Cesare reached into his briefcase and pulled out an old, grainy photo. This was Alessia. 10 years ago. He passed it across the table. Lindsey stared at the image, her breath catching in her throat. There, in black and white, was the woman from the shelter. Younger, cleaner, but unmistakably the same person. High cheekbones, heavy-lidded eyes, a guarded smile like someone who'd been taught never to show too much. Lindsey swallowed hard. It's her. It's Anna. Cesare retrieved the photo and tucked it back into his folder. Mr. Onio believes there may be a deeper connection between the two of you. Lindsey tilted her head. Deeper how? Cesare's gaze flicked toward the necklace. He wants a DNA test. Lindsey went still. You think I'm related to her? It's a possibility, Cesare said. A serious one. I'm not adopted, Lindsey said, but her voice held the uncertain wobble of someone who suddenly wasn't sure. My grandmother raised me. My mom left when I was small, but she trailed off, then whispered, unless. Cesare gave her a moment. You think I'm her kid, she said. We don't speculate, Cesare replied. We confirm. He stood, collected the folder and the printout, and left a small sterile envelope on the table. This contains a sterile swab kit. Instructions are inside. If you agree, we'll run it quietly. No names. No records. Mr. Onio will cover the cost. Lindsey stared at the envelope like it was ticking. What if it's true, she asked. What happens then? Cesare paused at the door. Then everything changes. That night, Lindsey sat with the swab kit unopened beside her tea. She hadn't called her grandmother yet, hadn't figured out how to explain something she didn't understand herself. Her heart was a storm of hope and fear. What if she was Alessia's daughter? What if she wasn't? Either way, the life she thought she knew had been cracked wide open. She picked up the necklace again and turned it over in her hand. There, on the back, was a detail she'd never noticed before, so faint it had taken the right light to reveal it. AO always. Not just a pendant. A promise. Lindsey opened the kit. 2 days later, Cesare stood before Lealdo in the villa's west wing, the private office no one entered without invitation. The results were in. The paper in his hand trembled slightly, despite years of training. It's a match, he said. 99.8% probability. Lealdo said nothing for a long time. Then, finally, he whispered, she had a daughter. Cesare nodded. And she gave her to the only person she trusted. Lealdo turned away, swallowing the weight of 10 years in silence. Outside, the villa's olive trees swayed in the dusk breeze, unaware that the last piece of his broken family had just come home. What would you do if one object from your past changed everything you thought you knew about yourself? Leave your answer in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss Chapter 5, where truth cuts deeper than blood. Lealdo Onio stood motionless in his study, the envelope still sealed in his hand. Outside, the sun had just begun to set, casting golden bars across the marble floor, but inside, the air was thick and unmoving. For all his years of power for the empire he had built from ash and fear, this thin, sterile envelope weighed more than any burden he had ever carried. Cesare sat silently across from him, not offering advice, not pushing the moment. Some truths had to be opened slowly, even by men like Lealdo. He peeled the flap back like it was stitched to his skin. The paper inside crinkled as he unfolded it, but his eyes immediately locked on the number in bold. 99.8% probability. Biological match. Lindsey Specter was Alessia's daughter. His granddaughter. The girl he had barked at across a dinner table was the last blood of his only child. He staggered back a step, as if punched in the gut. She had a baby, he said quietly. All this time, and she never told me. The pain curled around his ribs like smoke, choking him from the inside. She was alone. She gave birth, alone. She left that child behind so she could keep running. His voice cracked at the edges, rare and raw. Cesare, still calm, said, "She must have thought it was the only way to keep the girl safe." Lealdo turned away, his jaw clenched, hand shaking as he gripped the armrest of the nearest chair. "She didn't trust me," he whispered. "My own daughter didn't believe I could protect her, or her child." The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was full of failure. Full of the ghosts he had tried so hard to keep buried under layers of control and violence. "She died thinking I was still her enemy." Cesare stepped forward, his voice low but firm. "Or maybe she died hoping you'd become something more." Those words hung in the air, thick with implication. In his mind, Lealdo drifted back to that night, the last night Alessia had been under his roof. She had been 20, fierce-eyed, standing in the doorway with the necklace clenched in her fist and a fire in her voice. "You're not saving me, Papa. You're caging me," she had said. "If you really want to protect me, stop trying to own me." He remembered the way her voice softened when she stepped closer, how it broke just slightly. "One day you'll see why I had to go," she'd whispered, like it was both an apology and a goodbye. He hadn't listened then. He was listening now. Later that evening, Lindsey sat curled up on her couch, a cup of lukewarm tea resting untouched on the table. She hadn't slept. Had barely eaten. Her phone buzzed, but she let it go to voicemail. She'd been waiting, knowing something was coming and dreading what it would be. A knock echoed through the apartment, gentler than the last time. She opened the door to find Lealdo standing there, no guards, no entourage, no armor of power. Just a man who looked older than she'd seen him before, smaller, somehow, in the hallway's dim yellow light. "Can I come in?" he asked, voice quiet. Lindsey nodded, stepping aside. He walked slowly, as if unsure of his place in her small, worn space. She gestured toward the table. "You want tea?" "It's probably cold, but no," he said softly. "I didn't come for tea." There was a pause, then he reached into his coat and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. He set it gently on the table between them, but didn't open it. "That," he said, "confirms something we already know in our bones." Lindsey stared at it, but didn't move to touch it. Lealdo sat down across from her. "You're Alessia's daughter." The words didn't land all at once. They came slowly, a second too late, like a tide that doesn't crash but creeps and then drowns. Lindsey looked down at her hands. "No, that's not possible." She was just Anna. She was scared. She never said she had a child. "She was scared for you," Lealdo said gently. "That's why she left you. That's why she gave you the necklace. It was her way of giving you a name without painting a target on your back." Lindsey's throat tightened. "All this time, I thought she was just broken. A woman who had no one. But she had you. She had a father." Lealdo's eyes clouded. "No, she had a captor." The admission struck them both silent. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I made choices I thought were right. I tried to protect her through control. I thought I could steer her life like I steered my business, with force, with fear. And all I did was drive her away." Lindsey shook her head, tears brimming. "But she loved you. I could see it when she talked about the people she used to know. She said she had fire in her veins, and it wasn't just her own. I think she hoped you'd find me. Someday." Lealdo closed his eyes, overcome. "She left you with someone kind," he whispered. "And that saved you." Lindsey wiped her eyes. "I don't know who I am anymore. Everything I thought I knew about my life, it's all gone." Her voice trembled. "Am I supposed to be someone now? Am I supposed to belong to your world?" "No," he said quickly. "You're supposed to belong to yourself. I failed your mother. I won't fail you too." For a while, they said nothing. Then, quietly, Lealdo reached into his coat and pulled something small from an inner pocket, a key. "There's a house," he said. "In Montauk. It was hers. I kept it exactly how she left it, in case she ever came back." He set the key on the table. "It's yours now." Lindsey stared at it. Not because of what it opened, but because of what it symbolized. A door she never knew existed. A past she could step into. Later that night, after Lealdo left, Lindsey sat by the window holding the necklace in one hand and the key in the other. She didn't know where any of this would lead. But she knew she had to go. To that house. To her mother's last sanctuary. To the place where blood once ran and now, maybe, could begin again. If someone told you your life wasn't what you thought, would you cling to the truth you knew or follow the bloodline calling your name? Tell us your answer in the comments and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss Chapter 6, where secrets kept by family become truths that could tear them apart. The late afternoon sun spilled across the small kitchen table like a quiet witness to what Lindsey was about to ask. Her grandmother, Lindsey Specter, stood by the sink, rinsing out a chipped mug, humming something low and familiar. It was a comforting sound, one Lindsey had grown up with, the soundtrack to 100 ordinary mornings, and now it felt like a lie waiting to be exposed. Lindsey clutched the pendant in her palm, thumb brushing the back, where the engraved AO always shimmered faintly in the light. She waited until the water stopped running before speaking. "Where did I come from?" Evelyn froze. The question dropped between them like a stone in a still pond. Slowly she turned, her weathered hands drying themselves on a floral kitchen towel that had seen better days. "What kind of question is that?" she asked, a flicker of caution behind her gentle tone. But Lindsey didn't flinch this time. "I need the truth," she said, voice steady. "No soft edges, no half-stories. Not anymore." She held up the necklace, the same one she'd worn most of her life, without ever knowing what it really meant. "You told me Anna was just a woman passing through. You said she asked you to take care of me, but that's not all of it, is it?" Evelyn's eyes dropped to the pendant, and the air shifted. She pulled out a chair and lowered herself into it with a slow exhale, like the weight of what she carried had finally grown too heavy to hold upright. "I prayed you'd never ask," she said. "Not because I didn't think you deserved the truth, but because once it's said, you can't unhear it." Lindsey sat down across from her, hands flat on the table. "I already know who she was," she whispered. "Her real name was Alessia Onio. She was Lealdo Onio's daughter. And I'm hers." Evelyn didn't look surprised, only sad. "It was winter," she began, her voice already distant, pulled into memory. 2013, I was working the midnight cleaning shift at the shelter downtown. I'd just finished mopping the hallway when I heard crying faint, like it was wrapped in cotton. It was coming from one of the storage lockers near the back. She paused, eyes glossing with memory. I opened it. Inside was a baby you, wrapped in a towel, cheeks pink from cold. There was a note, handwritten, torn down the middle. "If I don't make it, raise her kind." She swallowed hard. "And next to you was this necklace and a Polaroid of a young woman with haunted eyes and a bleeding heart." Lindsey sat very still, her pulse thunderous in her ears. "You didn't call the police?" "I almost did," Evelyn admitted. "I stood there with the phone in my hand. But I looked at you. You were staring up at me like I was already someone. I don't know how to explain it. I just couldn't let you disappear into the system." Her voice cracked, and for the first time, Lindsey realized how young her grandmother had been back then. Not old and steady like she always remembered, but barely in her 50s, working 2 jobs, already tired, already carrying more than she should have. "I knew what would happen," Evelyn said. "You'd be taken into foster care, passed around, forgotten. So I did something I've never told anyone." She reached into the drawer beside her and pulled out a thin folder, yellowed with age. Inside were falsified papers, hospital records, a birth certificate with Lindsey Specter typed neatly on it, dated 2 days after the locker discovery. "I had a cousin in admin," Evelyn confessed. "We made it look clean. I told people your mother died after giving birth in secret and that I was the only one left to take you. It wasn't entirely a lie." Lindsey didn't speak right away. Her whole body felt like it was holding its breath. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she asked. "All those nights I asked about my mom, you just kept saying she was gone." "Why?" Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "Because I didn't want you to feel abandoned. I wanted you to believe, even if it wasn't true, that you were wanted. That someone left you because they had no choice, not because they didn't care." Lindsey blinked hard. "I hated you for a second," she admitted. "Right when you started talking. I hated that you let me live a life half made of lies." Then her voice softened. "But I think you also saved me." They sat in silence for a moment, the kind that doesn't need to be filled with words. Lindsey reached across the table and took her grandmother's hand. For everything that had been stolen, twisted, or erased, this bond had never broken. It had only grown stronger in the dark. That evening, a black car pulled up across the street. Lealdo didn't get out at first. He watched the little house with its crooked steps and faded trim, the glow from the kitchen window like a memory he never had. Cesare sat beside him, silent as usual. "She's still in there," Lealdo said. "Didn't run. Didn't scream. She faced it. She has her mother's backbone," Cesare said. Lealdo finally stepped out, walking slowly toward the front door. Evelyn answered before he could knock, like she'd known he was coming. She didn't flinch. "You must be him," she said. "The one she ran from." Lealdo nodded. "And the one who failed her," he replied. She stepped aside. "Come in." Inside, Lealdo didn't sit. He simply stood near the doorway as Lindsey joined them, her expression unreadable. "You knew," she said to him. "Not everything, but enough." He nodded. "She protected you in the only way she could. I didn't know she had a child. But now that I do, that changes everything." Evelyn watched him carefully. "Are you here to take her?" "No," Lealdo said. "I'm here to protect her." "And you?" Lindsey's brow furrowed. "Protect us from what?" "There are people," he said slowly, "who wouldn't like that Alessia Onio left behind a bloodline. Especially the family she was supposed to marry into, the Martellis. If they find out who you are, you become a threat." Evelyn's joy tightened. "Then they'll have to go through me first." "And me," Lealdo added. "But I don't want you two looking over your shoulders for the rest of your lives." He pulled a small folder from his coat. "This is an agreement. It secures your home, gives you access to security, and ensures full protection under my name. You won't need to hide anymore." Evelyn looked at Lindsey. "Your call, sweetheart." Lindsey took the folder, her hands steady now. "We'll read it. But I want to be clear about something." She looked Lealdo in the eyes. "You don't own me. You don't get to make up for what you did to her by taking control of me." Lealdo smiled faintly, a trace of pride behind the pain. "No, I wouldn't dream of trying." Later that night, Lealdo stood outside under the street lamp, watching the quiet house one last time. Cesare joined him, coat drawn tight against the cold. "She reminds me of Alessia," Lealdo said. "But there's something more." Cesare nodded. "Maybe this time, the bloodline has a chance to heal." The quiet didn't last long. Not in their world. Word spread like gasoline finding a spark, fast, invisible, deadly. Somewhere between Lealdo's men filing paperwork and Lindsey's name being added to a private security ledger, the Martellis heard a whisper they weren't meant to hear. And that whisper became a threat. It started with a phone call intercepted on a tapped line. A Martelli associate in Chicago, speaking to someone in Brooklyn. "She's real," the voice said. "The girl. Alessia's kid. He's keeping her close." There was a pause, then the words that froze blood in Cesare's veins. "Take her out. Quiet. No witnesses." Cesare played the recording for Lealdo just after midnight. They stood in the villa's office, lights off, the glow of the computer screen reflecting in Lealdo's eyes. He didn't speak for a long moment, letting the venom of those words sink in. "She's a threat to their legacy," Cesare said quietly. "If Lindsey's bloodline is proven, the Martellis lose more than power. They lose face. And in their world, that's unforgivable." Lealdo's voice was steel. "Then we move her. Now." Lindsey barely had time to gather a bag before the black SUV pulled up outside her grandmother's house. Evelyn watched from the porch, her hand clutching the railing, her eyes sharper than they'd been in years. "You'll call me," she said. "Every night." Lindsey nodded, hugging her tightly, trying not to let fear replace clarity. "I'll be okay," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. The ride was long and silent. Cesare sat beside her in the back seat, fingers tapping his phone, issuing quiet orders in code. Lindsey stared out the window, the city lights flickering like distant stars. She hadn't asked for any of this, not the legacy, not the bloodline, not the war. And yet, here she was, being hidden like a secret again. "This safe house," she said finally. "Where is it?" "Upstate," Cesare replied. "Quiet. Remote. No digital trail." Just trees, silence, and reinforced glass. She exhaled. Great. Just what every 25-year-old girl dreams of, witness protection chic. Cesare allowed the corner of his mouth to twitch. The safe house wasn't much to look at from the outside, a stone-and-wood cottage tucked deep into a thicket of pine and ash trees, flanked by security cameras and a reinforced steel door. Inside, it was warm and clean, with tall windows and a fireplace already crackling. Lindsey dropped her duffel on the couch and scanned the room. It didn't feel like a prison, but it didn't feel like freedom either. "How long do I have to stay here?" she asked. "As long as it takes for the Martellis to stand down," Cesare said. "Or for them to make a mistake." "What if they come here?" "They won't," he said. "And if they do, they won't leave." The words were meant to comfort, but they chilled her instead. Lealdo arrived the next day, wearing no suit, no watch, no ring, just a black wool coat and the exhaustion of a man whose ghosts were getting louder. Lindsey watched him from the window, unsure whether to open the door or let it stay locked. When she finally did, he stood there holding a small box, the kind used for jewelry or secrets. "You're safe," he said, stepping inside. "For now." "I didn't think it would be like this," Lindsey admitted. "I didn't think I'd be hunted." "They're not just criminals," Lealdo said. "They're traditionalists. You're a living contradiction to a story they've been telling for years. A threat to their narrative. And in this world, narrative is everything." She nodded, biting her lip. "And you?" He looked at her, something fragile flashing across his expression. "I'm your grandfather. That comes before everything else now." They sat by the fire as the day dimmed into twilight, neither one speaking for a while. Lindsey stirred her tea absently, watching the flames dance. "She never told me who she was," she said. "But now that I know, it explains why she was always scared. She wasn't just running from a man. She was running from an entire legacy. She wanted you to live outside of it," Lealdo said. "But now it's wrapped around you anyway." Lindsey looked at him then, really looked at the lines around his eyes, the sadness clinging to the corners of his mouth, the years of command turned into decades of regret. "You don't look like a monster," she said softly. "You look like someone who lost everything and is still trying to put it back together." Lealdo didn't answer at first. Then, quietly, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the box. "Your mother gave this back to me the night before she disappeared. Said she didn't want to wear anything with our name on it." He opened it slowly, revealing a ring, a delicate piece of gold, shaped like a laurel, with a single ruby set at its center. It was hers. My gift to her when she turned 18. Lindsey reached for it, then hesitated. "Why are you giving it to me?" "Because it's yours now," he said. "Not as a symbol of who you're supposed to be, but as a reminder that even in this world, something soft can survive." She slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. That night, she stood at the window and watched the stars come out, one by one. There were no city lights here, no sirens, no voices shouting into the night. Just silence. And within that silence, a fragile new shape was forming, not a family the way she had known it, but something close. Something real. Far away, in a villa with marble floors and colder hearts, Luca Martelli slammed a glass against the wall. "She's still alive," he barked. His consigliere nodded. "Protected. Hidden." Onio's pulled his men back from public view. "He's nesting." "Then burn the nest." The order was clear. But the price of following it would prove far greater than Luca expected. The safe house was quiet, but Lindsey's mind wasn't. It had been a week since Lealdo gave her the ring, a week of watching armed guards patrol the perimeter, of being addressed as Signorina by men with earpieces and blank eyes. She was no longer just a waitress trying to keep her grandmother's lights on. Now she was someone, a name in a world where names were power and power was dangerous. But all she felt was lost. Every time she opened her phone, a new headline danced on the edge of rumor. Onio bloodline resurfaces, heir to the underworld, daughter of ghost Alessia. Photos of her began appearing in whispers, some blurred, others eerily accurate. The press didn't know everything, but they knew enough. And the Martellis? They knew more. Too much. Lealdo had told her to stay out of sight, and she had for a while. But a life of hiding was not the same as a life of protection. And Lindsey had never been one to sit still while other people decided her fate. Not when there were questions still spinning in her mind, questions shaped like her mother. Not when the ghosts refused to stay buried. At Cesari's suggestion, they kept her under new names at each cafe, each public outing carefully planned, never alone, always with a guard. But even shadows cast too long eventually become seen. The morning of the attempt was cold and deceptively quiet. Lindsey had chosen a tiny corner cafe just outside Beacon, its windows fogged, its booths worn but charming. She was stirring her coffee when Cesare leaned in. "Stay down," he whispered, not looking at her. His voice held urgency, but not panic. "There's a man across the street. Black coat. Too still." Lindsey's pulse spiked. "Go now. Kitchen exit. Don't look back." She didn't argue. The moment she moved, the window behind her shattered. A single suppressed shot, clean, precise, meant for the head. The bullet missed, embedded in the wooden post just above where her neck had been seconds before. Cesari's man tackled her through the swinging kitchen doors as screams erupted from behind the counter. Outside, tires squealed, and a black motorcycle vanished into traffic before the security team could react. Later that day, the cafe was empty and cordoned off with yellow tape. Lindsey sat in the back seat of the SUV, trembling despite herself. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. "I wasn't even supposed to be there long," she whispered. "Just coffee. Just normal." Lealdo stood outside the vehicle, staring at the bullet hole in the brick, his expression unreadable. Cesare joined him, phone in hand. "No cameras in the alley," he said. "Too clean. Someone knew our exact route and backup schedule." This wasn't a guess. It was precision. Lealdo's jaw clenched. "Inside job," he said. The words were heavy, ugly, and possibly true. By nightfall, the villa had been emptied. Lealdo didn't wait for confirmation. He moved every asset, every meeting, every private channel into what Cesare called Level 0. It meant burner phones, dead drops, rotating safe houses, and temporary command centers that changed every 72 hours. Even the most loyal men were reassigned and tested under new security protocols. Trust was now a currency they couldn't afford to overspend. Lindsey watched all of it from the inside, a world shifting like a magician's deck, always moving, always hiding its truths beneath layers of illusion. Smoke and mirrors. That's what Cesare called it. But the more Lindsey watched, the more she realized the mirrors weren't just for the enemies. They were for each other. And she was tired of not knowing who she really was in any of them. That night, in a bunker beneath a rented farmhouse in the Hudson Valley, Lindsey stood before a wall of maps, notes, and old records. "I want to help," she said. "Not just sit behind glass and wait for someone to shoot at me again." Lealdo glanced at her but said nothing. Cesare raised an eyebrow. "Help how?" "By tracing my mother's path," she said. "The woman I knew as Anna Gable, someone must have seen her. Someone must have helped her disappear. And if we follow her trail, maybe we can figure out who else knew about me. Who else still might." Cesare stepped forward. "You realize how dangerous that is?" he asked. "I've been in more danger doing nothing," she said flatly. Lealdo considered her words. There was something in her tone, not desperation, but clarity. Alessia's voice echoed in her. The same fire. The same refusal to let others write her story. "All right," he said. "We do it together." The next few days blurred into movement. Lindsey pored over shelter records, scanned newspaper archives, and built a digital trail of places her mother might have passed through. Cesare arranged private access to state-run systems through old favors and untraceable servers. A bus station in Allentown. A halfway house in Rochester. A diner in Vermont where a woman matching Anna's description worked under the name Claire. Each thread added a new dimension to the life Alessia had lived in the shadows. "She changed names like people change coats," Lindsey said one night. "But she always stayed near the edge, never too far from New York, never too close." "She was watching," Lealdo murmured. "Watching me," Lindsey added. And it was then she found it. In the online archives of a regional newspaper from 2015, a blurred photo of a woman holding a baby at a shelter fundraiser. The caption read, "Claire Gable and her daughter, volunteers at Safe Haven Women's Center. Lindsey zoomed in. The woman's eyes, even pixelated, were unmistakable. And the baby in her arms had a necklace around her neck. Her necklace. Her heart stopped. She was still alive then, Lindsey whispered. 2 years after she vanished, Lealdo said. She didn't die right away, Cesare added. She survived. She tried. Lindsey's eyes filled with tears. She kept me safe, even when I never knew it. Later that night, Lindsey sat alone in her room, scrolling through the old articles on her tablet. Her mother had lived more lives than she could imagine, each alias a shield, each town a trap she'd narrowly escaped. But in every piece of the puzzle, there was one constant: her. The child Alessia left with strangers, but never truly left behind. A knock on her door broke her reverie. It was Lealdo. He stepped inside, holding something in his palm, an old, worn photo of Alessia as a girl, standing next to him in front of a fountain in Rome. She loved that place, he said. Said the water looked like glass you could fall into. She never told me anything about Italy, Lindsey said, taking the photo gently. She didn't want you to carry her chains, he replied. But now I wonder if she was hoping you'd find your own way back to the beginning. Lindsey looked up at him. I think I already have. Would you rather know the whole truth, even if it hurt, or be protected by silence if it meant feeling safe? Leave your answer in the comments and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss Chapter 9, where the past finally speaks for itself and danger walks in with a name. The office was silent except for the soft clatter of paper as Cesare placed the final folder on the table. That's everything, he said. Hospital records, shelter logs, handwritten notes from 3 different intake workers, all tied to names she used: Anna Gable, Claire Very, L. Onyx. Lindsey stared at the timeline they'd built on the wall, a fragile thread of aliases woven together into one woman's shadowed life. Alessia had never stopped running, but she hadn't disappeared, not entirely. Not until the fire. At the center of the timeline, pinned beneath a red pushpin, was the last date recorded, April 16, 2016. That night, an abandoned textile factory in Jersey City had gone up in flames. No one had been listed on the lease. No witnesses. But a woman matching Alessia's last known description had been seen entering that building 3 days before it burned. And she was never seen again. Flashback, Alessia's POV: she was tired in a way that didn't live in the bones, but behind the eyes. Every time she changed her name, her hands trembled less. But the ache in her chest stayed. Lindsey was only 5 months old now, a perfect, blinking bundle of softness who never cried unless she was cold or alone. Alessia clutched her tighter every night, knowing she was both the safest and most dangerous thing she had left. They were in Trenton now, hiding in the back of a mechanic's office that moonlighted as a shelter for women with nowhere to go. Alessia worked there under the name Claire, sweeping, answering phones, cooking pasta for 12 girls who called her Miss Gable. She smiled, made jokes, told them she used to be a dental assistant, a believable lie. But every creak of the front door made her heart jump. Every unfamiliar face set off alarm bells she'd learned to listen to. The Martellis were still out there. She could feel it. They had eyes in places she hadn't even stepped into yet. And she knew it was only a matter of time before one of her false identities peeled back just enough to show her real one. Alessia didn't fear dying, not anymore. But she feared what would happen to Lindsey if she was taken. If the Martellis found her daughter and used her the way they tried to use Alessia. It wasn't just about bloodlines to them. It was about dominance. Correction. Erasing the story that said a girl like Alessia could say no and get away with it. 2 weeks before the fire, she'd spotted him. A man across the street at the bodega. Tall. Leather jacket. Baseball cap. He wasn't shopping, just standing waiting. Pretending not to watch. She knew the look. He'd followed her before, back when she was Anna. And now he was back. That night, she didn't go back to the shelter. She took Lindsey, the duffel, and the cash she'd saved. Her plan wasn't perfect. But survival never required perfection, just instinct. And hers had kept her alive this long. She made it to a safe drop site in Jersey City, one of the locations she'd memorized from a contact who once owed her father a favor. It was an old warehouse, empty, forgotten, big enough to vanish in. She stayed there 3 nights, feeding Lindsey powdered formula by flashlight, praying no one saw the smoke from the space heater. On the 4th night, she made the choice. It was the hardest one she'd ever made. She kissed Lindsey's forehead, tucked the necklace around her tiny neck, and whispered, "Her name is Lindsey. Please keep her safe." The note was scribbled on the back of an invoice. She placed it inside the bag with the photo of herself, then laid her daughter gently in the open locker at the shelter she'd trusted most. She watched from the shadows as an older woman discovered the child, cradled her, gasped, then wept. Alessia wept too. Back at the warehouse, Alessia waited. She knew they were coming. She left the back door slightly ajar. A footprint in the dust. A cracked window pane. Just enough to make them believe she was still inside with the child. When the fire began, she was already watching from across the street, hood pulled low, heart in her throat. The flames moved faster than she'd expected. She didn't know who had started it, Martelli's men, the ones who followed her, or someone else entirely. But it spread like it had been waiting for the match. By the time the first engine arrived, the building had collapsed inward, steel groaning like a dying animal. And in the chaos, the fire washed away everything, including her name. Present-day Lindsey held the fire report in her hands, the heat of the pages pressing into her skin as if the flames still clung to them. No body was ever found, Cesare said. The assumption was incineration. But he pointed to the corner of the report where an asterisk was marked beside a line of text, "No DNA recovered. Search terminated due to structural collapse." She could have escaped, Lindsey whispered. Lealdo sat in the chair across from her, shoulders tense, eyes red-rimmed with memories he hadn't spoken aloud. "Or she stayed," he said, "and let the fire take her name. So they'd think she was gone. So they'd stop hunting." Lindsey's throat closed. "She died to save me," she said. "Didn't she?" Lealdo didn't answer right away. He picked up the photo from the case file, a scorched shot of the warehouse engulfed in flame. "She gave them a grave," he said, voice like gravel. "So you could have a life." They sat in silence as the fire roared in the photo between them. The sun rose soft and golden over the Onio estate, its light washing over the stone courtyard like forgiveness. Lindsey stood beneath the ivy-covered arch, her hands trembling only slightly as she smoothed the hem of her dark blazer. She wasn't here as a fugitive's daughter or a waitress in hiding. Not today. Today, she was stepping into a name, not to wear it like a crown, but to carry it like a promise. Lealdo watched her from the steps, eyes sharper than usual, but not with suspicion, with pride. In the weeks since the fire report, everything had shifted. Lindsey had stopped asking if her mother was alive somewhere. The evidence was overwhelming. And even if Alessia had survived the blaze, she had vanished by design. Lindsey knew now that her mother hadn't run away from family, she had run toward love. And she had left Lindsey behind so that love could live. They met at the family chapel, hidden on the northern edge of the estate where no paparazzi cameras could peek and no enemies could eavesdrop. Inside, the air was thick with incense and silence, the kind of silence that doesn't press down but lifts you up. Lealdo stood at the altar, dressed not in his usual tailored armor, but in something simpler, a black suit with no tie, his late wife's rosary in one hand. Cesare stood off to the side, nodding once as Lindsey entered. The priest, old and kindly, didn't ask questions. This wasn't a wedding or a funeral. It was something older. Something sacred. "I don't want to be a symbol," Lindsey said, her voice steady. "Not for power. Not for legacy." She looked up at Lealdo, eyes unblinking. "But I will take your name, because it was hers. And because it deserves to live without chains." Lealdo's lips parted, just slightly as if to speak, but no words came. Instead, he stepped forward and took her hands in his. "I give you my name not as a tool, but as a shield," he said. "And I accept you not as a pawn in this world, but as my granddaughter, the one your mother would be proud of." The priest spoke softly in Latin, then in English, blessing the blood bond, the legal adoption that made Lindsey not an heir to violence, but a bridge between past and future. 3 days later, the world learned her name. Lindsey Alessia Onio. It trended for 2 hours before Lealdo's people shut it down. But the damage, or rather, the intention, had been done. The Martellis responded the way everyone expected. They sent a single white envelope to Lealdo's front gate. Inside was a picture of Lindsey at the cafe, circled in red. On the back, just one word: undo. Lealdo didn't flinch when he saw it. He summoned his men, stood in front of the family's council, and issued a single warning, not in private, but over encrypted broadcast, knowing it would leak within hours. "You touch her again," he said, voice cold and deliberate, "and I will burn down your past, your present, and your future. You think you've suffered loss? You haven't even begun to taste it. My granddaughter is off limits. And if you don't heed this mercy, I will show you what a man with nothing left to lose can do." The Martellis didn't respond. Not publicly. But the message had been received. Lindsey stood beside a grave at dusk, her boots crunching softly over the dirt path as wind whispered through the grass. The marker was simple: Alessia Onio, 1991 to 2016, beloved daughter. Fierce soul. Endless light. She knelt beside it, fingers brushing the stone as she reached into her coat pocket. She pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn and faded, with 3 words scribbled in smudged ink: "Raise her kind." "Hey, Mom," she whispered. "I found him. He's broken. But I think we're fixing each other." She placed the note at the base of the stone and added a single daisy from the nearby field, not bought, not arranged, just real. Like her mother. In the weeks that followed, Lindsey didn't disappear into the Onio world the way most had expected. She didn't show up in designer gowns or fly in private jets. She enrolled part-time in law school, quietly, under her mother's alias, Claire Gable, the name that had protected her once. By day, she studied contracts and constitutional law. By night, she returned to the shelter her mother once hid in. There, in that peeling building with its flickering hallway lights and squeaky floorboards, she volunteered every Tuesday and Thursday. Not because anyone asked her to, but because this was where Alessia had once felt safe. This was where her mother's strength had lived in secret. The girls there didn't know her story. To them, she was just Lindsey, the quiet one who made strong coffee and sat with them while they cried about broken parents, broken systems, and broken hearts. She never brought bodyguards. Never wore anything flashy. But once, when a young girl asked about the necklace she always wore, Lindsey smiled and said, "It belonged to someone brave. And she left it behind so I'd remember what that looks like." Outside, the sun caught the necklace just right. It gleamed not with wealth or power, but with memory. And in that moment, the past wasn't a weight anymore. It was a light, a direction, a beginning. Thank you for listening to this story until the very end. There's another interesting one on your left screen that I think you'll really enjoy.